So the living wage, as the name suggests, the minimum amount of money is required for the living. We can say for the roti, kapda and makan. The minimum amount of money is required. That comes under the living wage. And this living wage and minimum wage. Minimum wage, the wage you are getting on the basis of your skills, on the basis of your skill set. It may be the 500 for some person. It may be the 50,000 for the one person per day, according to the per day. That's completely dependent on your skill set. So the government is trying to set up the wages on the basis of living wages instead of the minimum wages, because the minimum wages are not changed according to the inflation. As we can consider in 2021, if the inflation was the 4%, okay, but the wages set by the government of India at that time were the same, the 300 for the agriculture worker and the 350 for the worker working on the other farms, the 350 rupee for the person. This wage is a similar right now. These are same numbers, but the inflation is today is 9 to 10%. Inflation in the economy is 9 to 10%, means the people are spending more for getting the food, but the minimum wages are the same. So now the government is considering, instead of focusing on the minimum wage, let's focus on the living wage, because the living wage is derived by the inflation. If the inflation increase, then to get the food, clothes and the residence, it will increase the money. So the government will pay according to that. So the minimum requirement for the living wage is going to be replaced by the minimum wage is replaced by the living wage as per the government. So this is the idea to change on the living wage instead of the minimum wage, to check the inflation as well, ki how we can pay to the workers or how we can determine a particular level of the wage which can survive. This can also have a negative impact. When we decide a wage, like a minimum wage, we are considering a family of three. One is who is the earner, and two is the dependent person, which are depending on the earners. So in this case, the government is deciding that 350 rupees is the minimum wage. So in this 350 rupee per day, the person can eat food and can also do some expenses. But in the case of the living wage, this value can be up to the 150 or 180. It depends from person to person, but the government will consider the lowest side. Like you are getting the food in the 50 rupee, you are getting a residential space in 60 rupee, and some of the other expenses in the 60 rupee. The government may include up to the 180 rupee. But in the minimum wages, the government is need to pay up to 300 to 350 rupees. So it can also have a negative implication also. So here we need to know only what is the difference between the living wage and the minimum wage, and what is the right, what are the amount the government is paying right now for the living wages. Or the minimum wages is applicable to all the sector of the government or the private sector or not. That can be also the statement there. Okay. So the living wage is defined as the minimum income necessary for worker to meet their basic necessity. It is different from the minimum wages, which is based on the labor productivity and the skill set. The major difference, minimum wage based on the skill sets, whereas the living wage is based on the minimum meet their basic necessity. So government is shifting toward the living wages instead of the minimum wages. Right now, the concept of minimum wages is used by the government of India to how much to pay to a person when he is doing a work. In the case of, they divided the two categories. One category which are working in the agriculture labor and having no skill set, we can say they are not having a lower education level. But the other category which are having the higher education level and they are earning on the basis of that. Like one, they are fixed the 300 rupee for the agricultural laborers, and those who are working in the other departments or the other type of the labor work, they are fixing a 350 rupee of the minimum wages. So now the government is saying, instead of fixing of minimum wages as 300 rupee or the 350 rupee, we are now going to be shift to the living wages instead of the minimum wages. The argument given by the government, because the living wages are fixed according to the inflation, whereas the minimum wages is not fixed according to the inflation. Living wages will increase. Yes, that's why the government is giving the idea. Yes, basic necessity will be different for the different person, but the government is thinking at the idea like when we determining the poverty level. So at that poverty level, the one committee suggested that on the 30 rupee you can eat on a daily basis. And some poverty lines specifically suggest in the urban area you can eat on a 35 to 36 rupee per basic in 2011. So on the basis of that also include the subsidy given by the government, like in the form of the PDS, in the form of the fertilizer subsidy given to the farmers, in the form of the other subsidy given by the government to the people. So in that case, they will decide average minimum, average living wages. These are the wages required for the minimum requirement for any person to live in a day. So that's why they will decide it. A committee will be set up, then they will decide how much amount of the living wages will be changed, and it can be changed time to time according to the inflation. In the most of the cases, it will be going in the negative sense, because the 350 is a general, like a person can spend in a day and they can survive easily in India, right, in the right condition. But in the case of the living wages, that can be met up from the 180, 200, 150. That depend on the condition to conditions. So the minimum wages is the lowest amount of money a laborer can earn as mandated by the law. The living wage is determined by the average cost to live comfortably. So the government will decide the average cost. This is the average cost, and you can live on this average cost easily. In the current condition, they are giving the 300 rupee per day to the unskilled agriculture laborer, and the 350 rupee to the person in the non-agriculture sector is entitled. And if we need to hire a person for some work, we need to give a specific 350 rupee in the case of the non-agricultural, and in the case of the agricultural labor. This is the minimum. Higher can be anything. This is the central government decision, but it can be vary in the case of the state government also. Maybe the state government can give the 400 rupee. Maybe the state government can also give the 320 rupee for the agricultural laborers, but not less than the central prices. The central is issuing the sum of the wages. This is the minimum cutoff. This is the minimum requirement for the laborer. Based on this one. But now, right now, the condition, they depend on the work requirement. Here, the 9-hour work is requirement. In the MG Narega, according to the work, or that's a guarantee job. Here, there is no guarantee. MG Narega is a guarantee job. They set up the 212 rupee per day. According to the MG Narega, they 212 rupee per day. But that's a guarantee job the government will provide. But here, there is no guarantee. That's the minimum guarantee given in the MG Narega. So the pay scale is different in the MG Narega. Minimum wage, state government is not paying the minimum wages. Like you are an employer and the somebody working under you. So instead of paying a 350 rupee to that person, you are paying a 200 rupee. So the person can reach to the court. I work this much amount. If there is a legal agreement signed, it's a condition. Without signing any agreement, you are paying. There is no proof the person worked for you. But if there is a legal agreement signed between the employee and the employer, then the person can reach to the court. The government is setting a 300 minimum wages, but this employer is giving me the 200 rupee per day. So that can go to the court. So that's the condition here. Central government set up a committee under the Ministry of Labor that will decide the wages. So and this minimum wages is not decided in every sectors of the government of India. So they are saying if there is 1,000 person working in some of the specific sector, only for that sector it's a requirement to give a minimum wages. So if there is a statement, all the sector have this much amount of the minimum wages, this is not correct. There is a specific sector which are having the more than the 1,000 employee to work there. That's decided for the minimum wage. Even into the consideration of they are also saying about the 2,700 kilocalorie requirements for the day, and the requirement of 72 meters of the cloth per year. This is for the decision of the living wage. कि आपको 2,700 kilocalorie चाहिए, and you need 72 meters of cloth in a year. According to these databases, the government will decide if we are setting up a living wage for a particular time. So currently, minimum wage set by the government are applicable to only those who work in the sectors employing the 1,000 or more in a state concern. Which sector having the more than the 1,000 employee, only there it can be the applicable. And the scheduled sectors are identified the 45 sectors noted by the central government, and the 1709 are set by the state government. So if there is any question or statement related to if the minimum wage is applicable to all the sectors in India, so that will be a wrong statement. On which basis the minimum wage is decided on the basis of the living criteria, like what are the requirement for a person to survive in India right now. So it's like a requirement कि कितना spend कर सकते हैं, कितना inflation है उसके basis पे पूरा decide होता है. But it take time to revise the wages. Like the last wages were revised 5-6 years ago, but now the inflation is increased. Inflation, like we can say in the 2014-15, we are buying the atta, the wheat atta that was cost you the 20 rupee per kg, but the same atta is costing you now the 40 rupee per kg. So they double in the difference. Similarly, in the case of the LPG, we can say in the 2014, the prices of the LPG was 550-600 rupee. Now the prices of the LPG is 1,200 rupee, but the wages are not revised after that. So that's why the government is trying to shifting instead of the living wage, instead of the minimum wages, they are shifting to the living wages, so they can be decided according to the inflation.